The temperature hovered just below unbearable in the mahogany-paneled office. A ceiling fan rotated lazily overhead, doing little to disperse the heat or tension that filled the room. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat behind his desk, fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on the manila envelope before him. It had arrived an hour ago via private courier. No return address, no identifying marks. Just his name scrawled in blue ink across the front. The contents of that envelope would change everything. But for now, it remained sealed as Traoré considered his options. 28 days had passed since he'd assumed power in Burkina Faso through military intervention. 28 days of promises and planning, of reassurances to the people and closed-door meetings with military officers. 28 days of wondering who he could truly trust. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, sliding the envelope into his desk drawer. Colonel Kiswensaida Farouk stepped into the office, saluting crisply despite the heat. "Captain, the ministers have assembled as requested." Traoré nodded. "Thank you, Colonel. Tell them I'll be there momentarily." As Farouk departed, Traoré reopened the drawer and stared at the envelope. Whatever information it contained couldn't wait, not when whispers of foreign interference grew louder each day. With a decisive motion, he tore it open. What spilled out onto his desk made his blood run cold. 3 photographs, grainy but unmistakable, showed a military transport plane on a remote airstrip. Men unloading wooden crates under cover of night. And most damning of all, a clear image of Defense Minister Marcel Konaté shaking hands with a fair-haired man whose face was partially obscured but whose uniform identified him as French military. Beneath the photos lay a single sheet of paper, coordinates, dates, and a shipment manifest. Weapons. Advanced weapons coming into his country without his knowledge or authorization. Traoré slipped everything back into the envelope and tucked it inside his uniform jacket. The ministers could wait another 10 minutes. He needed to make a call first. "Get me General Bayala, secure line, now." Meanwhile, in a villa on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, Defense Minister Marcel Konaté poured himself another glass of whiskey, his third of the morning. His hands shook slightly as he raised it to his lips. The encrypted satellite phone on his desk remained silent, and that silence terrified him more than any reprimand or threat. It had been 12 hours since his French contact had gone dark. 12 hours since the last scheduled communication window had passed without a word. Something had gone terribly wrong with Operation Silent Hand, the covert arms transfer that would have made him wealthy beyond measure while positioning him as the next leader of Burkina Faso. Konaté drained his glass and reached for the bottle again. A sudden pounding on his front door made him freeze mid-pour. Through the window, he glimpsed military vehicles surrounding his property. He reached for the hidden compartment beneath his desk, fingers fumbling for the pistol stored there. But before he could grasp it, his office door burst open. Captain Traoré stood in the doorway, flanked by elite soldiers of the patriotic movement. His expression revealed nothing as he stepped forward and placed a manila envelope on the desk. "I believe we need to discuss your extracurricular activities, Minister." General Henri Bayala watched the presidential motorcade depart from his office window. At 62, he had survived 5 regime changes, always managing to position himself as indispensable to whoever held power. But this young captain, this Ibrahim Traoré, worried him. The man operated with an unpredictable combination of caution and audacity that made him difficult to manipulate. Bayala's secure phone buzzed. "Yes. He knows," said the voice on the other end. "He has photos, documentation. He's taken Konaté into custody." The general's weathered face remained impassive, though his mind raced through contingencies. "And the French side of the operation? Colonel Dumont has been recalled to Paris. They're disavowing any knowledge." "Of course they are," Bayala muttered. "Implement containment protocol. I'll handle Traoré." What neither man knew was that their conversation was being recorded by equipment installed just 3 days earlier by Traoré's most trusted security team. The captain had suspected communication between Bayala and foreign interests but needed proof. Now he was getting it in real time. In the presidential motorcade, Traoré reviewed the intelligence brief prepared by his chief of security. The arms deal was merely the visible portion of something much larger, a coordinated effort to destabilize his government before it could solidify its position. Before he could fulfill his promise to reclaim Burkina Faso's resources and dignity from foreign control. "Sir," his aide said, "we're approaching the military headquarters." Traoré nodded, mentally preparing himself for what would come next. The gathering of military commanders wasn't just about exposing a treasonous arms deal. It was about setting an example. About establishing that the old ways of foreign manipulation would no longer be tolerated. As he stepped from the vehicle, an explosion rocked a building 2 blocks away. Black smoke billowed into the sky as his security detail moved into protective formation around him. "Get the captain to safety," someone shouted. But Traoré raised his hand, halting them. "No, we continue as planned." He adjusted his beret and strode toward the headquarters entrance, projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel. "They want us frightened. They want us reactive. We will be neither." The conference room fell silent when Traoré entered. 23 military commanders and ministry officials stood at attention. He could feel their unease, their curiosity. How many of them were complicit? How many were simply pawns? And how many might actually support his vision for their country? "Be seated," he said, removing the envelope from his jacket. "Today we address a cancer that has plagued our nation for too long." Without preamble, he spread the photographs and documents across the conference table. 3 days ago, a shipment of French weapons entered our country illegally. Not old rifles or surplus equipment, but new tactical systems, anti-aircraft missiles, guided munitions, encryption technology. All delivered without the knowledge or consent of this government. He let his gaze sweep the room. Some faces registered genuine shock. Others betrayed nothing. Those were the ones to watch. Minister Konaté facilitated this transfer in exchange for promises of wealth and power. He believed foreign interests would remove me and install him as the new leader of Burkina Faso. Traoré's voice remained steady, matter of fact. He was wrong. On cue, the doors opened, and soldiers escorted a haggard-looking Konaté into the room. The minister's normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, his eyes darting nervously around the table. "Minister Konaté has provided us with the complete details of this operation," Traoré continued, though this was only partially true. "They still needed more information. We now know which external powers seek to control our destiny by arming factions within our military. We know their local contacts. And most importantly, we know their ultimate objective." General Bayala shifted in his seat, his expression carefully neutral. "And what objective would that be, Captain?" Traoré met his gaze directly. "To ensure that Burkina Faso remains a client state. To maintain their access to our gold, our uranium, our resources. To prevent us from charting our own economic destiny." He pressed a button, and screens around the room illuminated with maps showing mining concessions throughout the country. 84% of our mining wealth flows out of our borders. The profits rarely benefit our people. When we began discussing renegotiation of these contracts, certain powers grew concerned. This weapons shipment was meant to arm a faction that would maintain the status quo. A colonel near the end of the table cleared his throat. These are serious allegations, Captain. What proof do you have beyond these photographs? In answer, Traoré played the recording of General Bayala's phone conversation. The room grew tense as Bayala's voice filled the air, discussing containment protocol and handling Traoré. When the recording ended, all eyes turned to Bayala, who sat rigidly in his chair. General, Traoré said quietly, I believe you have something to add to our discussion. What happened next changed everything. Instead of denying the evidence or attempting to justify his actions, Bayala laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the silent room. You understand nothing, Captain, he said. Nothing at all about how this world truly works. Do you think your patriotic fervor and populist speeches will feed our people? Do you think neighboring countries will respect our borders without French protection? Or that the economy won't collapse when foreign investors flee? Bayala stood slowly, his authority filling the room despite the damning evidence against him. I've served this country for 40 years. Through chaos, through poverty, through coups and counter-coups. And I've learned one immutable truth. Burkina Faso cannot stand alone. We are not seeking to stand alone, Traoré countered. We seek partnerships based on mutual respect, not exploitation. We seek sovereignty over our resources and our destiny. Idealism, Bayala scoffed. The arms shipment you discovered. A fraction of what's been arranged. Even now, weapons are crossing our borders, finding their way into the hands of those who understand the natural order. Murmurs rippled through the room. Traoré remained outwardly calm, though alarm bells rang in his mind. If Bayala was speaking this freely, it meant he still believed he held the upper hand. General Bayala, you are relieved of duty effective immediately, Traoré announced. You will be detained pending investigation for treason against the people of Burkina Faso. As soldiers moved to take Bayala into custody, the general smiled thinly. You have approximately 72 hours, Captain. That's how long before the next phase begins. I suggest you use that time to negotiate terms for a peaceful transition of power. For the good of our people. The general was escorted out, his warning hanging in the air. Traoré surveyed the faces around the table. Fear, uncertainty, calculation, he could read them all. Now came the critical moment. Commanders, ministers, he addressed them. Each of you must now decide where you stand. With foreign interests who view our nation as a resource to be exploited. Or with the Burkinabé people. He let the question linger before continuing. Those who have participated in this conspiracy have one opportunity, one only, to come forward now. Provide all information about weapons shipments, planned operations, foreign contacts. Do this, and you may yet redeem yourselves in service to your country. 3 officers immediately stood, followed hesitantly by 2 more. Traoré nodded to his security chief to escort them out for debriefing. The rest of you, return to your posts. Maintain heightened security protocols. Check your units for any unauthorized weapons or unusual activities. Report directly to me or Colonel Farouk. He straightened to his full height. Dismissed. As the room emptied, Colonel Farouk approached. Sir, if what Bayala said is true, 72 hours doesn't give us much time. Then we'll have to accelerate our plans, Traoré replied. Contact our intelligence team. I want every piece of information those officers provide verified and acted upon immediately. And get me secure communications with Mali and Guinea. It's time to activate our regional security protocol. And the French ambassador, he's been requesting a meeting since this morning. Traoré considered this. Schedule him for tomorrow. By then, we'll have more leverage for that conversation. That night, while the city hummed with rumors and speculation, Traoré worked from a secure location, coordinating with loyal commanders to track down the weapons Bayala had mentioned. Reports flowed in from border checkpoints and military outposts. Some were concerning. Unusual movements near the northern border, unscheduled flights in restricted airspace, sudden recruitment activities among certain militia groups. Shortly after midnight, his security chief arrived with new intelligence. Sir, we've intercepted communications suggesting the main weapons cache is being held at an abandoned mining facility 40 kilometers east of the capital. Traoré studied the satellite imagery. Who controls this area? On paper, a Chinese mining consortium. But our sources indicate they pulled out 6 months ago. The facility appears to be guarded by private military contractors, European and South African, primarily. Mercenaries, Traoré muttered. How many? Approximately 30 personnel. Professional equipment, advanced communications. Traoré's mind worked through the tactical options. A direct assault would be costly, potentially triggering wider conflict. But allowing these weapons to remain in place was equally dangerous. Prepare 2 operation plans, he ordered. 1. Conventional assault with our best Special Forces unit. 2. A smaller infiltration team to gather evidence and potentially sabotage the weapons before they can be distributed. Yes, sir. And there's one more thing. The security chief hesitated. We've identified the source of the leaked information about the weapons transfer. It appears to have come from inside the French diplomatic mission. Traoré raised an eyebrow. Someone inside their own embassy exposed their operation. Yes, sir. We've tentatively identified the source as Mathieu Leclerc, cultural attaché. Career diplomat, 20 years of service. No obvious reason for him to risk his career this way. Perhaps Monsieur Leclerc has developed a conscience, Traoré mused. Or perhaps he's playing a deeper game. Either way, I want to meet him, discreetly. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the capital awakened to find military checkpoints at key intersections. National television and radio announced a security operation against arms traffickers, urging calm and cooperation. No mention was made of foreign involvement or the detained officers. The French embassy buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Ambassador Philippe Renaud paced his office, awaiting instructions from Paris while fielding calls from nervous French nationals and business interests. The exposure of Operation Silent Hand had created diplomatic chaos, with the foreign ministry publicly denying any knowledge while privately scrambling to contain the damage. This is a disaster, he muttered to his deputy. Paris disavows any connection, yet expects me to salvage the situation. How am I supposed to maintain our influence when they've undermined our position so thoroughly? His deputy, a seasoned intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover, shrugged. The operation was military intelligence's brainchild, not ours. We warned them Traoré was more capable than they estimated. And now I must meet with him in, he checked his watch, 3 hours. What exactly am I supposed to say? Sorry about that little arms shipment intended to overthrow your government. Deny, deflect, offer some trinket of cooperation, the deputy suggested. The usual diplomatic dance, and perhaps suggest that France might recognize his government officially if he demonstrates responsibility. Renault snorted. You still don't understand what we're dealing with. This isn't some corrupt officer seeking international legitimacy. The man genuinely believes in national sovereignty. And worse, he's competent. Across town at the presidential palace, Traoré received confirmation that the infiltration team had reached the mining facility. Live drone footage showed the compound, a collection of industrial buildings surrounded by a perimeter fence, guarded by men with professional military bearing. The team's thermal imaging revealed an underground storage area packed with crates. Estimated value of weapons, Traoré asked. Conservatively, 20 million euros, his operations director replied. Enough to equip a small army. And sir, they've identified the markings on several crates. These aren't just French weapons. There are Russian and American systems as well. Traoré frowned. Multiple foreign powers involved in the same operation. That doesn't make sense. These countries compete for influence. They rarely cooperate on covert actions. Unless, he thought, this wasn't a government operation at all. Unless the players were private interests with connections across national boundaries. Mining companies, arms manufacturers, private military contractors with their own agendas. Sir, his aide interrupted. Mathieu Leclerc has arrived for your meeting. The Frenchman who entered Traoré's office looked nothing like the typical diplomat. In his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a slight limp, Leclerc had the weathered appearance of someone who spent more time in the field than behind a desk. Captain Traoré, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for meeting with me under these unusual circumstances. Traoré gestured to a chair. I'm curious, Monsieur Leclerc. Why would a French diplomat risk his career to expose his own country's operation? Leclerc smiled faintly. Who said it was my country's operation? The weapons are French. Some of them, yes. Just as some are Russian and American. The weapons trade is rarely confined to national boundaries, Captain. Traoré studied him carefully. Why contact me? Why now? Because what's happening in Burkina Faso is part of something larger. Something that threatens not just your country but the entire region. Leclerc leaned forward. What do you know about the Wagner Group? The name hung in the air between them. The Russian private military company had been expanding its influence across Africa, offering security services to governments in exchange for mining rights and political influence. I know they operate in Mali, Central African Republic, and Libya, Traoré replied cautiously. I know they represent Russian interests while maintaining official deniability. That's the public understanding, yes. But the reality has evolved. Leclerc reached into his jacket and removed a digital drive, placing it on the desk. 3 years ago, key figures in the Wagner Group began forming partnerships with private interests from multiple countries, French mining executives, American defense contractors, Chinese resource companies. They created a consortium that operates above national interests. Private powers carving up Africa while governments look the other way, Traoré said, making no move to touch the drive. This isn't exactly a revelation, Monsieur Leclerc. The scale is the revelation, Captain. And their methodology. Leclerc tapped the drive. They don't just work around governments. They actively destabilize and reshape them according to their needs. The weapons you discovered, part of a larger effort to trigger controlled chaos in the Sahel. Not enough to collapse governments entirely, but enough to ensure they remain dependent on private security services. And these services would be provided by shell companies leading back to the consortium. They create the disease, then sell the cure. Quite profitable. Traoré's eyes narrowed. And your role in all this? Leclerc hesitated. I was recruited 2 years ago to help coordinate diplomatic cover for certain operations. I believed I was serving French interests in a complicated world. 6 months ago, I discovered the truth, that I was facilitating private exploitation on an unprecedented scale. So now you've developed a conscience. Now I'm choosing sides in a war most people don't even know is being fought. Leclerc nodded toward the drive. Everything I've managed to document is there. Names, companies, bank transfers, operational plans for Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. Traoré made no move to take it. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, Leclerc said simply. Verify everything. But do it quickly. The weapons cache you're currently monitoring. It's a diversion. The main operation begins tonight. A coordinated attack on 3 military installations by soldiers loyal to General Bayala, using weapons that have already been distributed. Traoré's expression didn't change, but his mind raced. If Leclerc was telling the truth, they had hours, not days, to prevent a coup. If he was lying, this could be an elaborate trap to misdirect Burkina Faso's limited security resources. I'll have someone escort you out, Traoré said, pressing a button on his desk. Thank you for your information. After Leclerc departed, Traoré immediately summoned his security team. I want everything on this drive analyzed now. And double the guards on General Bayala. No one speaks with him without my direct authorization. He turned to Colonel Farouk. Redirect half our surveillance resources to our own military bases. Focus on the ammunition depots, communications centers, and command posts. If anyone is planning to move against us tonight, they'll need to secure those first. And the mining facility, sir? Traoré considered. Maintain observation only. If it's a diversion as Leclerc claims, we won't waste resources on a direct confrontation. Within an hour, intelligence officers confirmed key elements of Leclerc's information. Bank transfers linked several French mining executives to shell companies that had recently hired former Wagner Group operatives. More disturbingly, they found communications suggesting infiltration of Burkina Faso's officer corps went deeper than General Bayala alone. As evening approached, Traoré gathered his most trusted commanders for an emergency briefing. We have credible intelligence of a coordinated coup attempt planned for tonight, he began without preamble. 3 military installations will be targeted. Headquarters in Ouagadougou, the airbase at Bobo Dioulasso, and the training center at Camboinson. He displayed a map showing the locations. We believe the conspirators have already smuggled weapons into these facilities and recruited sympathetic officers. Their objective appears to be seizing control of our command infrastructure and communications systems, then announcing the restoration of constitutional order, with General Bayala as interim leader. A young major raised his hand. Sir, if they've already infiltrated these bases, how do we respond without triggering full-scale conflict among our own forces? It was the right question, and the most difficult to answer. Civil war was exactly what the consortium would want. Chaos that would require peacekeeping by private military contractors, followed by resource concessions to restore stability. We used their playbook against them, Traoré answered. Precision, targeted operations, and most importantly, information control. He outlined the counterplan. Small, elite teams would secure key positions before the coup forces could mobilize. Simultaneously, they would cut specific communications channels while keeping others open to control the flow of information. Remember, many soldiers at these bases are innocent of any involvement. Our objective is to isolate and neutralize the conspirators with minimal casualties. We are protecting Burkina Faso from external manipulation, not fighting our own people. As his commanders departed to implement the plan, Traoré received one final intelligence update. Analysis of shipping records showed a pattern of unusual cargo flights between a private airfield in the United Arab Emirates and various locations in the Sahel over the past 8 months. The manifests listed agricultural equipment, but the weight distribution suggested otherwise. "They've been building toward this for months," Traoré murmured. "How many other countries are facing similar operations?" At 10:47 p.m., the first shots were fired at the Ouagadougou headquarters. A group of 20 soldiers led by a captain loyal to Biala attempted to seize the communications center, only to find it already occupied by Traoré's elite counterterrorism unit. The brief firefight ended with 3 conspirators wounded and the rest surrendering. Similar scenes played out at the other installations, Coup forces moving to execute their plans only to discover key positions already secured by loyal troops. By midnight, the coup attempt had effectively failed, with minimal casualties and most of the conspirators in custody. Traoré, monitoring operations from his command center, received the reports with grim satisfaction. They had prevented bloodshed and maintained control, but this was merely one battle in a larger war. The consortium Leclerc had exposed would try again, perhaps with different tactics or in neighboring countries. As dawn broke, he prepared to address the nation. The international press was already spinning narratives, some portraying the night's events as an internal power struggle, others suggesting Traoré had fabricated a coup attempt to consolidate power. None mentioned the complex web of private interests that had financed and orchestrated the operation. Before the cameras began rolling, Traoré reviewed the evidence they had assembled: financial records, communications, weapons serial numbers, testimony from captured conspirators. Enough to expose not just the coup attempt but the broader conspiracy behind it. The question was, how much should he reveal? A full disclosure might protect Burkina Faso in the short term but would make him powerful enemies internationally. Corporations implicated would pressure their governments. Diplomatic relations would suffer. Economic consequences would follow. But keeping the truth hidden would allow the consortium to regroup and try again, perhaps in Mali or Niger next time. The cycle of exploitation would continue. Traoré made his decision. When the red light on the camera illuminated, he addressed his people directly. Citizens of Burkina Faso, last night our security forces prevented an attempted coup that sought to reverse the gains our revolution has made. This was not merely an internal matter but part of a coordinated international effort to maintain control over our resources and our future. He held up documents captured during the operation. We have evidence that private interests, mining companies, arms dealers, and security firms from multiple countries financed this attempt. They sought not to support any political ideology but to ensure continued exploitation of our nation's wealth. With measured words, he named companies and individuals involved, outlined the complex financial networks they had used, and revealed the broader strategy for regional destabilization. He emphasized that these were private interests operating outside official government channels, a critical distinction that might provide some diplomatic cover for the countries implicated. Today, Burkina Faso sends a message to these interests: our resources belong to the Burkinabé people. Our sovereignty is not for sale, and those who attempt to undermine our independence, whether through bullets or banknotes, will fail. He announced a comprehensive review of all mining contracts and natural resource agreements, as well as new partnerships with neighboring countries to share intelligence about external interference. We seek friendship with all nations based on mutual respect and benefit. But we will no longer accept partnerships that treat Africa as merely a source of wealth to be extracted. As he concluded his address, Traoré knew the real work was just beginning. The consortium would retaliate, through economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, perhaps even direct action. His government would need to strengthen its position quickly, building genuine popular support through tangible improvements in people's lives. The international reaction came swiftly. French and American diplomats issued carefully worded statements expressing concern about the allegations while emphasizing their commitment to Burkina Faso's stability. Mining company stocks fluctuated as investors processed the implications. And in board rooms across Europe, North America, and Asia, executives held emergency meetings to assess their exposure. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening across West Africa. In Mali, Guinea, Niger, and beyond, people gathered in public squares to watch Traoré's address. His words resonated with populations that had witnessed decades of foreign exploitation disguised as partnership. Social media buzzed with support, young activists organized solidarity demonstrations, and political leaders, even those historically aligned with foreign interests, found themselves pressured to respond to their citizens' awakening consciousness. 3 days after his address, Traoré welcomed the presidents of Mali and Guinea for an unprecedented regional security summit. What transpired behind those closed doors remained confidential, but the joint declaration that followed announced new intelligence sharing protocols, coordinated border security, and principles for reviewing foreign investments and resource contracts. The arms deal that Traoré had exposed became more than just a foiled coup attempt. It catalyzed a regional conversation about sovereignty, resources, and true independence. Young officers in militaries across West Africa began quietly discussing their country's relationships with former colonial powers. Civil society organizations started investigating mining concessions and resource contracts in their nations. 1 week later, Mathieu Leclerc was found dead in his apartment in Ouagadougou, an apparent suicide, according to the official report. Few believed this explanation, but the French embassy made no protests, quickly cremating the body and transferring his effects back to Paris. Before his death, however, Leclerc had ensured that copies of his evidence reached not only Traoré but journalists at Le Monde, The Guardian, and Al Jazeera. The resulting investigations would continue for years, gradually exposing the full extent of the consortium's operations across Africa. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the revelation of the arms deal marked a turning point, a moment when he transformed from a military officer who had seized power to a leader with a clear vision for his country's sovereignty. Whether he would succeed in implementing that vision remained uncertain in a world where power rarely surrenders its privileges willingly. But for now, in Burkina Faso and beyond, people spoke of resource nationalism with new conviction. Of partnerships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Of an Africa that might, finally, control its own immense wealth. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to FictionWire Africa. This is a fictional story created purely for entertainment.